All right, here we go. Welcome everybody. This is Eli Sagor from the Cloquet Forestry Center, and I'm really glad to be here today. We have what I'm sure will be both an informative and interesting webinar presentation from Katie Fernholz, and we're going to start that up momentarily. But it's good to see a good crowd coming in. A couple of quick announcements before we start. This is our August webinar presented by the Sustainable Forest Education Co-op and the University of Minnesota Extension. Glad you're here. Next month, September 15th, we're going to hear an update on emerald ash borer. We're going to hear from Angie Amborn and John Osthus with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and I think also Matt Russell. Matt will be involved in that presentation as well. Again, that's September 15th, all about EAB in Minnesota. We'd love to have you join us for that. Quick plug for the Camp 8 podcast. If you haven't heard it yet and you like podcasts, something to listen to in your truck, give it a listen. You can search for it just as Camp 8, wherever you get podcasts. We've got recent episodes with Mike Kilgore on private lands in Minnesota, Mike Dockery on indigenous models of sustainability, Patty Thielen, 5 Questions with a Forester, just a bunch of really good recent episodes, and we'd love to have you tune in. If you're hoping to get continuing education credits for this webinar, remember that you have to request those. We'll share a link to a CEU request form at the end of the webinar. And when you close this meeting, it should take that page, bring that page up for you. So don't forget to do that. Q&A, I would invite you to submit questions, comments, anything you'd like Katie to respond to anytime. She'll pause a couple of times during the presentation, but you don't have to wait. We love to have those in advance so that I can queue those up and share those with Katie verbally. So submit your questions anytime using the chat pod. Best if you submit those publicly, but if for some reason you prefer not to share them publicly, then be sure to share them with me, with Eli Sagor, privately, but again, publicly is best. And I just mentioned the Cloquet Forestry Center virtual tour. I'll put that link in again because I know for folks who join after it shows up in the chat, you might not see it, but that's tomorrow over the lunch hour. We'll be out in the woods, at least on your screen. Should be a fun event. But you're here today to hear from Katie Fernholz. I'm just thrilled to have Katie here. We've been chuckling about the very ambitious title that she picked for this talk. And I'm sure it's going to be interesting. And I say that in an authentic way and not a, oh, that's interesting sort of way. Katie's a good friend and really a leader in Minnesota's forestry community in a number of ways. And I won't belabor the introduction, but again, just will mention that we're thrilled to have her. Katie is CEO of, I think it's president and CEO of Dovetail Incorporated. Consulting, well, a think tank, I guess, based in Minneapolis. And Katie, again, glad to have you. And with that, Katie, the floor is yours.
Perfect, Eli. We'll jump right in. I will get my screen shared and we will see if I can figure it out, right? And I'm assuming you can hear me, otherwise you'd be gesturing all over the place, right? Exactly. Good. Well, I am thrilled to be here. And I think this ambitious title, someone suggested it, and I said, why not? Let's just bite off a big chunk of the apple and go for it. So as you said, I am a president CEO of Dovetail Partners. We're a think tank in Minneapolis, and I've worked in forestry in Minnesota for right around 23 years. So excited to share just my thoughts. I know there are other people on this call that have as much or more experience with forest products industry and within Minnesota. So certainly, I think it's not as if my opinion is the only opinion, but it's meant to be an opportunity for us to explore this together and see what we learn together. So this is the territory I hope to cover in the webinar, a little bit of history, a little bit of context. I'm going to talk about some specific opportunities I see that inform the future of the forest industry and relate those to Minnesota a little bit. But then, you know, when you have a platform, you use it. So I'm going to give you some advice in the end about what I think we really need to be doing and thinking about if we're going to take advantage of these opportunities and really embrace this future of the forest industry. So before we get into this, what you're going to hear from me in this webinar is going to be pretty forward-looking, pretty darn optimistic. Those of you that know me, my own saying about myself is I'm optimistic on the edge of being delusional sometimes, because I just believe so much in the potential and the opportunities that we have before us. But I want to give us all a healthy reality check. So first of all, it's August and winter will be coming. That's the first reality check with this slide. But the second, much more serious reality check is there are current trend lines within the forest industry that are not good. That in many ways we could say the future of the forest industry is really tough and really struggling, whether we look at the closing of mills or layoffs or decreasing demand for certain products or competition from other regions, whatever it is. I want to fully acknowledge and have this just reality check that says there's some reason to be concerned about the forest industry, and certainly the recent impacts of the pandemic aren't adding to people's sense of confidence. So I just want to acknowledge that. I'm not going to try and unpack all those challenges and address them today, because I'm going to take a much more 30,000 foot viewpoint, but I just want to fully acknowledge that for many people in the forest industry right now, looking to the future is challenging and we're under a lot of stress. So let's jump into this and let's talk a little bit about history. I think it's always valuable to remind ourselves of how we tell our stories and how we got to now and those kinds of things. So I am a forester at heart, as many of you know, and so starting just with this context of shifts in forest management paradigms, and this slide actually comes from Canada, so I guess we could pick it apart as Americans and say it's not quite perfect, but you know, it's pretty good. And it just shows this change over time and how we kind of frame up our forest management thinking and how we've shifted our lens around forest management. And especially if you look at the green part of this slide in the last 100, 120 years, this era that you can think of as the emergence of sustainability within forest management, starting with this idea of sustained yield management, which in my opinion is a lens that's looking at economic sustainability or productivity sustainability, but how that then moved into multiple use. So there's multiple kind of measures of the bottom line. You get into integrated forest resources management, and you really get into sustainable forest management. And those elements with integrated are really looking at those environmental dimensions of forestry as well. So but the last 100, 120 years of forestry, there's been a lot of change in how we talk about ourselves, how we evaluate our work, what we report on within our metrics and accomplishments. There's been a lot of change. So I think that's important to recognize. Within the forest industry over the last several generations, there's also been a lot of change. So this is looking at wood utilization within the forest industry, within primary processing. And that top, we're going from the 1940s basically to the present day. And if you look at these things from left to right, the green bars show in any given period of time how much of a log that made it to a sawmill would end up in lumber. So back in the 40s, it was 35, 39% would actually be processed into lumber, and that percentage has increased over time. If you go to the right of that, that orange color is how much of the material would have made it into energy production. And that has changed over time as well. But then that red bar on the end shows that back in the 1940s, the largest proportion of wood that was harvested and brought to primary processors ended up as a waste material. So just the types of technology we had in the 40s, the types of products we were making, for all of those reasons, when we harvested roundwood, a whole chunk of it ended up as sawdust and chips in a big pile and in landfills and whatever. It was considered a waste material. Over time, that has changed dramatically. What you see is the emergence of those yellow bars, which is actually the transfer of materials from primary processors to other facilities to make products that are based on composites, based on chips, based on the residuals from the primary processor. So that whole area of wood products that's based upon those byproducts, that all emerged in the last several generations, and has been an important part of getting to where we are today, which is basically 100% utilization within our forest industry when we have, and I'm going to preface this, where we have those robust diversified markets for all of those raw materials and secondary materials. So where those markets exist, where the solid wood and the materials resulting from that primary processor can be used, and where there's markets for bioenergy, where those three things exist, the forest sector has been able to achieve basically 100% utilization of harvested materials. And it's a big change over the level of waste that occurred in the industry in generations past. As I said, there are parts of, and we're seeing this in Minnesota, where some of the markets for some of those residuals have declined, and there's a need to rebuild this full utilization model. But it is something that we know the forest sector is capable of doing, that we have achieved those levels of utilization. And it took generations to do it. It took innovation around forest products to do it. And it took change, you know. So the point here, when we look at the history of forest management and the forest industry, is we know how to change. We know how to grow. We know how to rise to the challenge and evolve with new information and get better over time. This is something we have a track record of doing. And so we shouldn't be afraid of change. We shouldn't be afraid of charting our own destiny. So let's talk about opportunities and the future of the forest industry. And I think this graphic of the wood supply chain is helpful just to understand that when we look for opportunities within the forest sector, we can look across all of these elements of the wood supply chain. And certainly, you know, on the left-hand side, when we look at the forest management part, there's been lots of opportunities and change and innovation around how we manage forest land, how we do management planning. You know, there's consideration currently around green jobs and recruitment and retention, labor needs, but there's a lot of opportunity in that part of it. In the middle part, there's a lot of opportunity in terms of how we manage and the types of materials that we are harvesting from the forest, the raw materials that go in to the industry. But we're here today to talk about the future of the forest industry. So I'm going to focus on the right side and the different products and materials that are part of our wood supply, that are part of the forest sector, and really the opportunities within each of these three large areas around, you know, the dimensional materials or the built environment type of materials, packaging, those types of materials, and also around energy. We're going to talk about all three of those and where those three areas are going with just change and what the future looks like. Before I go into that, Eli, any questions, comments at this point that we should touch base on?
Well, if there are, then people are muted or not typing them. Oh, there we go. On the flowchart side, Katie, what do the colors mean?
Flowchart side, which flowchart was this? This one?
Right
I don't know. I didn't make, this looks like a flowchart to me. I don't know. I didn't make this. That's a good question for Forest Resources Association. Very good question. I didn't make it. I just grabbed it because they gave me permission. So. They're pretty. They're pretty. That's the reason for the colors.
Hey, visual interest. There we go.
Exactly.
I'm not seeing any others. While I've got the floor, I'll say one more time, folks, don't be shy about questions, comments, answers, but whatever you want to do in the chat pod. So we're ready when Katie pauses next. Katie, go ahead.
Perfect. Good. Well, let's jump into all three of these. So we're going to talk about mass timber, renewable energy, and packaging materials. So mass timber, I mean, I think the point here is when we, you know, sometimes within forestry and amongst ourselves, we'll talk about things a certain way and frame it up a certain way. The thing I want you to take away is for the broad audiences that we're trying to influence, which is everybody who has anything to do with the built environment, from policymakers and code officials to architects and engineers and, you know, people that buy buildings, whatever. For that broad audience, mass timber is increasingly about addressing climate change in the built environment. It's about an innovative strategy that allows us to store carbon in the built environment. For other forestry stakeholders, it can be about creating new markets. It can be about addressing, you know, undermanaged forest resources, reducing wildfire risk. You know, those of us in the forest sector, we can put a whole bunch of other reasons behind mass timber, but increasingly, this is the focus of why mass timber is so important. And how mass timber evolved as something that the forest sector has really embraced and promoted and started to capitalize on is oftentimes, you know, we look at the forest sector and we try and evaluate what are our strengths, where are our opportunities, and this kind of thing. And one of the things that was recognized, you know, it's 20 years ago now, where some of these conversations started, but recognizing that for the strength of the forest sector, one of the great things in the United States especially, is a lot of our residential homes, the homes we all live in, built from wood. It's one of the best markets for forest products. You know, we build our homes from wood, and that's wonderful. It's a core market for the forest products industry. But what we know and what we were learned yet again in the last decade is that home building is a boom and bust kind of cycle. It can fluctuate dramatically. And when it goes down, it hits the forest industry really hard, and it's very disruptive to the forest industry. So if we look at market opportunities for forest products within the built environment, the part of the built environment that the forest sector has historically had a small segment in is commercial building, non-residential building. Traditionally, forestry, as you see in this chart, 11%, somewhere, 10 something percent of that market by some measures. But what's recognized is commercial construction tends to be much more stable, much less fluctuation because of economic trends. Commercial buildings, takes a long time to plan them, get them approved. And so once you do them, you're kind of doing them. I mean, they just don't bounce around the same way that residential construction does. So what was recognized within the Forest Service and working with the checkoff program that was developed to support the softwood lumber sector, penetration into the commercial built environment would help create some stability, predictability within the markets for forest products. And that's part of the reason that commercial sector building has been targeted. And out of that conversation, we've looked in mass timber, cross-laminated timber, these types of materials that can be used for commercial type structures, higher buildings, more floors, bigger structures, office buildings, this kind of thing. So it's very exciting in this, in this very pragmatic sense of what's good for the industry, their stability, penetrating new markets, creating new demand, these kinds of things. But anyone on this call who's been involved with mass timber, it is just fun to see the energy around this. I mean, this is just typical, you go to a mass timber tour and it's just packed. It's packed with people that just find this type of building intriguing and exciting, and it sparks their imagination as architects and engineers. It's beautiful. It just resonates with people. So there's something with mass timber that just strikes at the heart of what people are looking for in the built environment. And it's very exciting to be a part of and to see that take off and benefit the industry and create markets. If you're interested in looking at mass timber, I mean, part of the takeaway message too is it's not just tall wood or these, you see the headlines, they're going to build an 80-story, whatever. Yeah, it's not just that stuff. There's also very practical applications of wood that we're seeing within, non-residential construction. So you can go to this website and see their gallery that goes on for days with all these different projects, in every type of industry and whatnot. The other thing I'll mention on this slide is this website is called Think Wood. When it first came out, I think maybe a decade ago at the most, 7 years ago, it was called Rethink Wood. And so just in this short time frame, the industry's been able to go from like a challenging people kind of mindset with rethink wood, take another look, hey, give us another chance, that kind of mentality, to think wood. I mean, that's how quickly this mass timber conversation has evolved, that it's no longer kind of this, hey, would you give us a chance? It's more like, yeah, you want this. So it's neat to see that evolution just in the marketing and messaging to the core audiences. But I encourage you, check it out. You'll see how exciting this is. In terms of Minnesota, there are 2 well-recognized examples of mass timber, tall wood buildings, however you want to think of them. On the left, Butler Square, one of the oldest examples, constructed in 1908. And right in downtown Minneapolis, and on the right, T3, one of the newest tall wood buildings constructed. And if you, get down to Target Field, if you're a Twins fan, go Twins. Both of these buildings are within a long throw, a Sano home run from Target Field. Maybe I shouldn't. Sano's been a little cold lately. Maybe I should. Cruz has been doing better with the home runs. But point is, both of these buildings are right there in that warehouse district, right in the heart of downtown. And next time you go to a Twins game, get down to Target Field, plan a little side trip and you can see both of these examples. They're spectacular. And they have helped put Minnesota on the map when it comes to the conversation around tall wood. I also want to mention, people always say, how does this happen? How do you develop these markets? How do you, and this softwood checkoff contributed a great deal to the market research and the work that's gone into promoting tall wood and mass timber. Also, out of that research, recognizing that to enable the adoption, you have to have technical assistance. And so Think Wood and Woodworks are really leading organizations in this effort, and Woodworks focuses on helping architects and engineers, evaluate project opportunities and execute tall wood projects. And so that enabling technical assistance has been really important for the adoption. Here is a map of mass timber projects, CLT, and all the different types of mass timber projects around the country. And if you see in that chart right underneath the map, I mean, just focusing on CLT, I mean, the total number, almost, over 900, but just CLT, 163 projects. To give you perspective, Dovetail did a report on tall wood buildings in 2016, if I remember right. Maybe it came out in January 2017. At that time, globally, there were 20 buildings of record for tall wood buildings. So this is just in the US, and 163 that are under construction, not in design, but under construction and developing as of June 2020. And so the uptake has been significant. The other contributing factor, of course, is code adoption. One of the things that happened in the last year or two is getting the International Code Council to modify the code, the recommended and approved code for doing tall wood buildings with mass timber. And as cities and states adopt the latest version of the code, we're seeing that come into practice more. So last couple things on mass timber. If you're looking for information about this and you just want to come up to speed, there's this report, I believe it's still free for a limited time. So this mass timber report is end all be all in terms of the whole story from start to finish, everything you might want to know about mass timber and the state of the industry. And the other thing, this literally just hit my inbox like 30 minutes ago, right before this webinar, but Think Wood has put out their take on some of the 6 trends, the things that are going on right now with timber in the built environment. As I mentioned, codes, we're seeing prefab and modular technologies influencing this, these business models around construction and being innovative. And these are the things that those that are working within mass timber are keeping their eye on. And, Think Wood and Woodworks, I mean, it's very much a forward-looking, this is the future of the industry kind of approach. And it's pretty aggressive, but it's pretty exciting. So before we go to bioenergy, anything, Eli, we need to clarify, answer questions on?
I don't think so, Katie. There's one question, but I wonder if you're going to talk about this later. The question is, what about carbon sequestration and storage as a forest product through, say, a carbon credit program?
Oh, well, we will get there. We will get there, because absolutely, carbon credits and really valuing that carbon storage option with products as well as in the forest. Absolutely, we will get there. We'll talk carbon before the hour's up. Promise.
Okay, I got one more now that just came in. What woods, I assume that means what species of wood are being used in mass or tall timber buildings?
Yeah.
Specifically, what Minnesota species, if you can?
So much of the work with cross-laminated timber, mass timber, tall wood buildings are Western species. Doug fir and softwoods is dominant. But what we're finding is you can make these types of engineered products out of lots of different species. So in the Northeast, around Massachusetts, and that forest region, they've been researching the use of hardwoods for cross-laminated timber and for the type of engineered materials used in these buildings. And in the Southeast, they've been looking at Southeast softwood species as well. There's a big CLT plant going on and being built in Arkansas, if I remember right. And they're going to be sourcing, I believe, primarily from the Southeast. So there's the opportunity in Minnesota for our species to contribute to CLT. There was which means contributing to mass timber and tall wood. But there's also an opportunity, the study that was done in Minnesota looking at it in terms of our opportunity to, the way that Minnesota's always worked too, where we bring materials in from other areas and assemble and make value-added products. So how it connects to the market demand, or connects to Minnesota forest. There was a really good study done in Minnesota that looked at those opportunities, and I think they did a good job of kind of unpacking both how it might relate to our species and how it might relate to just broader industry opportunity. But so the short answer is softwoods tend to dominate, but it doesn't have to be that way with the research that's going on and some of the opportunities. There have been some innovative looks at using waste wood too, deconstruction wood out of buildings and using that. I mean, some of the people will say, hey, you can take anything and glue it together and make CLT. You just have to kind of have enough supply and all those kinds of issues.
And Katie, that's all the questions we have right now.
All right, let's talk renewable energy. And so just like I said, mass timber is really about this climate change mitigation in the built environment and connecting a carbon storing material with an interest in addressing climate change within the built environment. For renewable bioenergy, this is really about changing the energy sector and creating an opportunity for the energy sector to evolve from its history into where it wants to go next, and bioenergy being a bridging technology for that. And I think Enviva is a pellet manufacturer in the Southeast. I think they put pretty clearly. This is what wood energy, bioenergy is all about today. It's about displacing coal, growing more trees, and fighting climate change. And Enviva, I've worked with them for a number of years. They really are an innovative company. I think they are a very good example of what responsible bioenergy looks like, and also the positioning within the forest industry today, and how the forest industry, the pellet industry in particular, is reacting to challenges, reacting to, you know, the questions that are being asked, and positioning themselves. And so at the Enviva website, you know, they have all kinds of information that helps understand how their biomass system is sustainable, responsible, how they track their carbon emissions with their materials, how they ensure that their forest products are coming from well-managed forests and not impacting other forest values negatively. And it's really an interesting example of, certainly the wood pellet industry, the bioenergy industry has been attacked, been criticized and questioned about their environmental footprint. And what you really see in what Enviva's done and what other industry leaders have done is they rise to the occasion and they say, okay, let's figure out if we can do better. Let's address that. Let's measure that. Let's track that. Let's, you know, inform what we're doing. So I think it's really a constructive model of how a new industry can emerge and grow, but also be responsive to the challenges and the expectations of their customers or their stakeholders, that kind of thing. So Enviva, I think, is an interesting example of presenting this idea that there is such a thing as good biomass energy, and that's not the same as saying biomass energy is good. You know, it's just reversing it to say, let's define it. What is good biomass energy? How can we do that and live up to our own expectations about benefiting the environment? One of the key tools out there for enhancing the sustainability of bioenergy is the Sustainable Biomass Program. I've worked with this program on their technical committee and as a peer reviewer for their auditing system. And almost all of the biomass that's exported from the US to Europe is certified through this program. And it includes carbon accounting, where they have to track their carbon emissions associated with their operations. And it's really interesting, the data that comes out of it, because what it shows is, intuitively, it seems like, oh my goodness, if we're shipping pellets all the way to Europe, this can't pencil out. Well, it actually does. It's really interesting, because when you look at biomass wood pellet production, the largest component of energy impact and emissions impact is from the production. You know, taking wood and compressing it to a pellet is a pretty energy intensive operation. But the transatlantic shipping and the rail transfer and all that stuff, it's not as significant as you would think, and that's been measured time and time again within these producers. And so that's, I mean, like I said, it's important to say that not all biomass is good all the time everywhere, because there are always trade-offs in energy systems. But this idea of good biomass, responsible biomass, sustainable biomass, that's increasingly been defined within the industry and the industry's leadership, and also within these programs. And it's pretty exciting to see how far it's come. If you're looking for some, you know, conversations around biomass energy, the state of Maryland recently did a series of webinars. Dovetail supported their work by doing a white paper where we investigated key questions around biomass sustainability, including some of the research I just mentioned in terms of how does that transatlantic shipping, you know, pencil out. And that white paper is available at that website and those webinars. And I think it's, you know, for those of us that have been around the bioenergy debate for a while, and we've listened to kind of, you know, the concerns and these kind of, it's really exciting to see how much the sector has responded to those concerns and innovated in terms of the technology, the materials, and making sure that we are defining good biomass in a responsible way, and the support that's coming from partners that certainly a decade ago were quite skeptical, but are increasingly supportive of wood energy as an opportunity, like I said, to change the energy sector and help it move in the direction it needs to move. All right, Eli, one more time before we go into bio-based packaging. Anything on wood energy? Everybody wants to take a tour.
No, I'm surprised, but I'm not seeing any questions, Katie. I think
No problem.
it looks like you're good to go. I'm sharing
Good.
a couple of links here. I try to type those links in from some of your slides, and
Oh, thank
so
you.
if folks are not watching the chat, if you're interested in those links, you'll find them there. We try to share those afterwards as well.
Perfect.
Here's another question that just came in. Katie, are you planning to touch on liquid fuels?
I won't. I'm not going to go on into liquid fuels at this point. So there's good opportunities for that. I mean, Minnesota has some real leadership opportunities there, but maybe when we get to the chat, or if you or anyone else on the call has some good references for liquid fuels, please put them in the chat.
I was going to say the same thing. I'm glad you said that, Katie. I hope folks would be, don't hesitate. If there's something you want to share, use the chat. We'd love to see that. Go ahead, Katie.
Excellent. Thank you. Good. So let's talk about bio-based packaging. And again, this has emerged as a leadership opportunity for the sector because of its perception as an alternative to plastics. I mean, who hasn't seen these images for the last few years? I mean, whether it's plastic bags, plastic bottles, plastic rings, whatever. I mean, plastic straws. I mean, and certainly there's some, with the pandemic, there's some sense, oh, we're, single-use plastics make a resurgence, this kind of thing. But there is this long-term trend of trying to move away from these materials that are not renewable, they're not biodegradable, they just don't contribute to the types of materials we want to see in our environment and the type of outcomes we want to see from our product use. So this is an opportunity for paper packaging for these materials. And I mean, the number of innovations around sustainable packaging is truly amazing. If you go to this page, they list all kinds of examples. I don't know if you've seen some of the innovative examples, but it shows the innovation that's happening in the different materials that can be made from wood fiber, or in some cases, agricultural fibers as well, but really bio-based packaging. And one thing to note is that this organization, Paper and Packaging, again, this is coming from a checkoff program. So just like the tall wood building, mass timber, the Think Wood and Woodworks, it directly relates to that softwood checkoff program through the USDA. Same thing here with the Paper and Packaging Council. It is a checkoff program that has funded market research and promotion for these materials. And the big thing is that underlining market research, where they really start to understand the consumer response to these materials and how to influence consumer behaviors. So Paper and Packaging, these checkoff programs have really helped the industry engage in some of these conversations and be part of the solution when people are looking for alternatives to plastic. Like I said, these alternatives to plastic, I mean, you look at the date on this, this was August 11th. I was putting, my slides together and boom, here's another one that hit the inbox, an example of those rings on soda cans or whatever, and replacing them with a fiber-based or wood-based product. And this is everywhere. I think the week before this was whiskey bottles or bourbon bottles made out of paper. I mean, it's happening all the time that companies are looking for how they can shift from plastics to these renewable materials and reduce their environmental footprint and respond to consumer concerns and concerns within the marketplace. So I'm not going to spend too much more time on that, but just briefly, if anyone, I know there's probably people on the call too that see some of this paper and packaging stuff firsthand. So if you have things to share in the chat, please do. But anything else on that, Eli? Any new things pop
yes.
up?
Just as I was saying, Katie, continue. Another question came in. So you were talking in the last break about, or in the last section, that not all biomass is good or whatever.
Yeah.
And the question came in, what are the key factors determining good biomass energy?
Yeah, I mean, there's different organizations have defined that differently. But generally what we have seen is we want to see biomass developing in regions where there are higher and better uses for the higher value logs. It's one of those things. Remember when I was talking about how you have like the complete utilization of wood? You don't want, material that could be used for lumber or even veneer getting chipped up or turned into wood pellets. So one of the things that we look for within responsible biomass energy is the utilization of materials that would be challenging to utilize for higher value products. So like in Maryland, they're looking a lot at urban wood waste as a very good source of biomass energy potentially, because it's a difficult material to handle for other materials. So it's looking at the highest and best use of materials. That's a critical factor. And then also the harvesting practices. And one of the big things is making sure that our use of bioenergy isn't driving land use conversion or forest type conversion and the loss of sensitive forest habitats. But if you look at the Sustainable Biomass Partnership, there's a bunch of different things defined within there. In Viva, they have a very clear definition of what a good biomass means for them. And the last thing I'd say on it is one of the key things for responsible sourcing is always transparency in those supply chains and knowing where the material comes from. And so that's been a very strong commitment within the bioenergy sector as well, is the track and trace program. That's what Enviva uses, but the producers, their commitment to sustainability, a big part of it is knowing where it comes from so you can track back and see what's happening on that forest landscape and within that sourcing area.
Katie, another question came in. What are the checkoff programs? And before you respond, I'll note that Caitlin Wilson has put in a sort of a definition of what those are, but maybe the question was more kind of what are they called or which programs are out there?
Exactly. So there's one for softwoods and then there's paper and packaging. They're formal names. Boy, if I could remember. Softwood checkoff program, that isn't the formal name. But basically, what most people are more familiar with are the checkoff programs for other ag products. Like the pork producers, you know, what is it? The other white meats, you know, beef, it's what for dinner, what, you know, those. So checkoff programs, they are fees assessed on producers. And those fees then go into this pool of money that is used on market research and promotion of those products. So there's a long track record of that within the USDA for other agricultural products. And even at the state level, you know, with, you know, milk and these kinds of things. But with what has to happen, the way we got the softwood checkoff and the paper and packaging checkoff is the producers have to vote to assess a fee on themselves. And so the softwood producers and the paper and packaging producers took that vote and assessed themselves. And then after that vote and the implementation of the checkoff program, the collection of fees and all this, I think it runs for 7 years initially. It's either 5 or 7 years. And then there's another vote to renew it. And so we're coming up on some of those timelines around some of the checkoff programs. But that's kind of how they're structured. And you can, that was my generalization, and you can look up the USDA website and get the facts and the better details. But it basically means you end up with a significant pot of money that can be used for evaluating market opportunities to look for, hey, where can we go with these products? And then go after those identified opportunities that come through the research. So they're really innovative. They've moved the needle. The hardwood sector was also asked to vote on a checkoff program, and they voted it down. So there was a third potential forest sector checkoff program that did not pass. So, but if anyone else has put things in the chat, links about that, and I'd be happy to talk offline if people want more information on it. But in my opinion, the checkoff programs have been a game changer for market research and promotion of forest sector products, and just innovative market insights that have come out of those programs.
Katie, a question from our friends up in Itasca County. You were talking about the innovation in new products. Is there any progress with biofilms, or is most of the focus on applying fiber-based, basically paper products?
So there are innovations there. It's just not the one I'm paying as much attention to. But I know the Forest Products Lab, there's been work there. And so it's on the radar screen. There's lots of stuff with nanotechnology, all kinds of things I'm not touching on. You know, I'm really looking at these big 3 buckets that are, in my mind, they're influential in terms of changing the overall perception of wood. You know, that wood is innovative for our buildings. Wood is innovative for our energy system. Wood is what I want to see show up with my Amazon order. They change that view of wood products. So, but there's many other materials and research and innovation going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always disappointed to see that plastic envelope with Amazon.
Exactly.
One more, Katie, yep. and then
we'll finish up.
For now, you can move on. Yeah. What if there's no market for lumber and the only market available is biomass?
Exactly. And that happens. I mean, there are, you know, it's interesting, a couple of years ago, looking at causes for deforestation. And one of the primary causes is market failures. You know, there are parts of the country and parts of the world where you don't have these diversified markets for all the different species or all the different diameters of wood. And that, you know, it's one of those things, the first thing is to recognize that, the next thing to do is to try and address it. But that's why increasingly people have recognized you can't, you know, penalize a market for using the material that's available when that's what is available in the market. So I'm completely with you. Highest and best use is something to strive for, and something we should always, you know, seek to get better at. But you also have to just operate within the market and what the utilization, what's available. And we see that all the time. I mean, urban wood's a good example. There are beautiful 24-inch clear trees in urban areas that end up, you know, chipped and made into mulch, you know, because nobody's going to haul one tree, or rarely will, you know, people. So it happens all the time that not every single tree gets to its highest and best use. But hopefully as we have stronger markets, then those ancillary kind of supporting industries can also develop. And that's what you see is build a forest industry, and, you know, with enough effort, then other things can follow.
So Katie, that's all we got. I'm really pleased to see a good discussion going on. People are sharing a link to a nice liquid fuels report and some other things. So keep that coming. But Katie, you can continue.
Good, excellent. That's it. I love that, because like I said, there's many people on this call with experience within the industry. So please do continue to share. So, you know, just to get into the home stretch here, you know, at the end of the day, what we're seeing in high level conversations, and I want to acknowledge, yeah, we don't always see this in some of our, you know, forestry or, you know, on the ground kind of operations, but in high level conversations within, you know, mayors and governors and, you know, industry leaders, decision makers, is this connection between forest and forest products offering solutions to complex challenges, especially environmental challenges, climate change, you know, but recognition of forest and forest products as natural climate solutions, as just where we want to see our world going. And one of the concepts that's out there is circularity and a circular economy. And circularity is really just about designing materials and products so that at the end of their life, there's something good that's going to happen. You know, recycling, it's biodegradable, it'll be reused, whatever it is. But circularity is just a way of moving material and product flows in a circular way rather than a linear, you know, harvest it, manufacture it, dispose of it, moving from a linear model to a circular model of materials and products. And oftentimes when you talk to people in the forest sector, it's kind of like, yeah, we've been doing that for a while. And that's exactly my point. Circularity is a natural fit for the forest sector. I mean, just like I said, you know, materials come from the forest, the roundwood, the primary facility, and in an ideal situation, the byproducts of that go to one place, some energy comes out, you know, we do this in our sleep in the forest sector. And so the point is that circularity and the conversations around the circular economy are an opportunity for the forest sector to step up and say, yes, this is our wheelhouse. This is what we do. If the world wants more circularity, then talk to us, because we know how to do this. And with your help, we can do this really well in the forest sector. So that's my main message. When you see those things about circular economy, and it's kind of like, aren't they reinventing the wheel? Isn't this? Yes, they are. And that's okay, because we know how to make those wheels. So I think circularity is a conversation for the forest sector to really jump into and be contributing to. Another one is increasingly we're seeing governments and corporations look at the Sustainable Development Goals as a way to frame up how they're measuring and reporting on their impact. And again, the big benefit here is forests and forest products contribute across the board to these sustainability goals. I mean, obviously they contribute to things like clean water or clean energy if you're using bioenergy, these kinds of things. But they also, forests and forest products contribute to quality of life, human health, stability within our communities. There's a whole bunch of things. So again, my main point here is when in the forest sector, in my opinion, when we see these high level UN sustainable development goals, and it's kind of like, what does this have to do with us? You know, I really encourage you to say, this is all about us. We own this space. This is a space that forestry can step into and lead on. And we should not see this as a threat or something that's going to start telling us how to do. No. We can step into this space and say, listen, forests and forest products have a lot to offer. And I think that's just really the opportunity for us to see these high level issues as a way to influence the way that governments and corporate leaders are viewing forests and forest products, that it fits right in to their goals and the things that they're trying to achieve. So when we talk, this is, you know, getting back a little bit to the carbon question, not so much with carbon offsets and those kinds of credits, but because there are carbon offset programs for forest management as well as for forest products. And the forest products one isn't as robustly applied. But bottom line, what we're finding The way I think about it is forest, any product, at the heart of it, a product is about form and function. You know, does it do what you need it to do? I mean, does that 2x4 hold up my wall? But it's, you know, so at a certain level, forest products are about form and function. But products are also always about the benefits, the perceived or the tangible benefits of that product or that material. And increasingly, carbon storage, you know, environmental impact, circularity, sustainable development goals, those are benefits that people want to understand about our materials. And I think we have a great story to tell for those. But it's the example that's always shared, you know, is, you know, like when you're buying a car, yes, it matters how big the car is or what color it is, but there's these other types of benefits that consumers are always looking for, like safety, or, you know, gas mileage efficiency, those kinds of things. Those are really, there's these other types of benefits that it helps to be able to explain to the people that are evaluating your products and your opportunities. And so when it comes to forest products and the forest industry, being able to talk about our energy effect, the carbon effect, value added, you know, how forest products contribute across the board to these types of benefits that decision makers and leaders are trying to achieve. It's really part of that next wave of how we see greater adoption of forest products and investment in the forest industry. So the final thing I'll touch on, and then hopefully we'll still have time for some questions. This is just, you know, me. Those of you that know me, I can't help but tell you what I really think. And in my opinion, for the future of the forest industry, our attitude is everything. You know, how we see ourselves and how we present ourselves to decision makers that can influence the future of forestry. It's our attitude is everything. And I think we can do this. We really can do this. So when Dovetail was formed in 2003, and back then, I mean, some of our early work, what Dovetail was challenged to look at was global competition, and how global competition was a challenge to the domestic wood products industry. And we also were looking at the hardwood industry and challenges that they were facing, and the need to reinvent themselves and rise to, you know, some of the new realities within their sector. And going back to these reports, I mean, the threats may have changed or the challenges may have changed, but there's still these core components of how do you operate? How does a sector, how does a business, how does an organization operate in a competitive world, in a changing world, you know, where you know, there's just evolution is occurring. And so, you know, those of you that like reading old reports, you might enjoy finding those at our website. They're kind of fun to look back on and how we saw the world in 2005 and 2007. But some of the key takeaways was there's a need in a changing world, in a rapidly changing world, for leadership, organizational leadership. I mean, part of change is charting a course, and you need leaders to do that. And you need to be a learning organization. You know, how do you keep tabs on these things? I was thinking about it today. People over the years have asked, Katie, how do you track some? You know, I think it's at the point where this sounds old school, but one of the things I've done for years to keep tabs on some of the key things I try and track is Google Alerts. If anybody still remembers Google Alerts, it sounds so 2005. But anyway, you know, there's tools like that, so you can just keep an eye on things and adopt that culture of being a learning organization and being able to react to information more efficiently, or, you know, digest it. And then, you know, with adjusting change, it's that having a vision, and seeking out, you know, creativity. I mean, change means you have to think of, okay, what are our possible reactions to this? And, you know, just thinking of the whole spectrum and suite of possibilities requires a culture of creativity. And also relationships. We can't, each of us can't be experts on everything. So rely on your relationships and your network to help you navigate some of the things that are just, you know, that's, you know, I can't do it all. So, hey, maybe amongst us as a group, we can figure it out together. And then at the bottom, you know, the bottom line with this is reminding ourselves that the world demand for wood products has never been greater. You know, the market is growing. We have access to information, tools, you know, the things we need to adapt are easier than ever. And the U.S. forest products industry has some core assets and businesses. And that's, you know, just some core things about us that make us competitive in certain ways. One is our proximity to a very large market. That doesn't hurt, but there's a bunch of things that, you know, focusing on our strengths and figuring out where we can leverage those things. But like I said, if you go back to these reports, if you like your historic documents, you might still find a few nuggets in there And I remember some of the conversations we had back in the day around those things. But when I talk about attitude is everything, you know, I think what's been happening in the last few years around the forest sector and how we view ourselves, talk about ourselves, present ourselves to stakeholders and decision makers. One of the influential things is Forest Proud. I'm sure many of you have looked at this. Dovetail's a member. I was on their board. I'm on their strategic committee now. But it really is a way for framing our conversations around forestry and the forest industry in a way that says, the way that says, you know, we're proud of what we're doing and we're going to keep getting better at it, and we're going to lead on these challenges and these issues that society's facing, climate change or, you know, the built environment. You know, forestry is here and it's ready to lead. And some of the research behind Forest Proud, you know, they looked into the kind of messaging that works with the public, works with policymakers, decision makers, and they did find that for many of the core audiences for forestry, we do have to first acknowledge some of the past. Yeah, okay, forestry didn't always get it right. We did go through this exploitation era. There were times when we emphasized the economics a little bit more than we maybe should have. So there is this thing, you know, that we know we have to acknowledge our history. But that's part of why, understanding why we're so motivated to do better, because we've learned some hard lessons in forestry. So Forest Proud has done some great work about acknowledging the history and building a community around what the future potential is for forestry and the forest sector. And I think it's really neat. I mean, I'll put in the plug. I mean, if your organization isn't yet a member of Forest Proud, I really encourage you to consider it. I mean, it's a meaningful group to be a part of and support this conversation. The same kind of thing is happening globally. Wood, the ultimate renewable, is kind of the Forest Proud of Australia, and it's actually available to be used globally. If you like that slogan and you want to put it all over your material, check it out. Wood, the ultimate renewable, is a very innovative program coming out of Australia, and we're seeing it replicated all around the world as well. But again, it's about just embracing with pride the potential of the forest industry to solve some of the world's biggest problems. Some of the latest stuff we've seen with attitude is everything is the forest sector's response to COVID-19. And these were some international webinars, but really kind of saying, okay, how do we position forest products, the forest industry, forest management, sustainability within this challenge, you know, a humanitarian kind of crisis? And what does it mean for forest products to be essential? How can we be better prepared for the next challenge? So I think this has also been a constructive response in an incredibly challenging time. So my takeaways when I talk about attitude is everything is adopting this attitude within the forest sector that we believe we can grow the pie. That this isn't about competing, divvying up ever smaller chunks, grabbing pieces. You know, don't picture your family's Thanksgiving. Picture this is a bakery and the pies keep coming out. there's no end here. And we can grow the pie. We can have more. And there's a colleague, you know, when I first started working with mass timber years ago, a colleague of mine from the paper industry said it best, said, thanks for what you're doing with mass timber. It helps all of us. You know, because it changes the public perception about wood and forest products and how much we want these materials in our economy, in our lives, and it connects us to the forest in really constructive ways. So whether it's a market opportunity just for paper or for mass timber, it does elevate the opportunities across the forest sector in some very meaningful ways. And it's that growing the pie and avoiding this scarcity mindset. And I understand that's difficult. I understand that, yes, these markets do compete over some of the same raw material. I'm not ignoring the reality in some situations, but I also challenge us to say, okay, when we do see that competition emerging, how do we go back to saying, that means we need to incentivize more, growing more trees, planting more trees? Because that certainly is the response we've seen in other regions, that where they have married up a commitment to growing their forest industry and growing their forest right alongside it, that they're gonna grow that pie and do more with more. And I think that's a really important attitude and helps us build a community that will help us have the critical mass, because I really feel like the next wave of innovation for the forest industry, we've had this in the past. You know, when you're going to invest in innovation within a sector, oftentimes you need policy. you need enabling policy, supportive policy in many shapes and forms. We've seen that with tall wood buildings. There have been policy changes as well as code changes. And we're going to see that in terms of climate change policy, that impacts energy and plastics use and these kinds of things too. But if we want to drive the policy conversation, we have to be able to have that critical mass and a large enough voice to not just react to policy, but drive it. Last slide. I got to go back to, where we began. And the last challenge I want to leave with all of you is certainly we've all seen in recent years and recent weeks, the push for social equity and social justice. And many people in the forest sector might be saying, well, what does this have to do with us? Or I'm not sure, or, where do we land as a sector with these questions and around social equity and inclusion? And this is what I would tell you, is from my viewpoint, in the last 100 years, we've been on a journey of sustainability. It started with sustainability focused on economic measures of success, sustained yield, productivity. It evolved into embracing environmental measures of success, sustainable forest management, looking at integrated forest resource management, wildlife habitat on par with riparian areas, on par with cover type, these kinds of environmental considerations. I would tell you we're in the midst of the social leg of sustainability. And social equity and inclusion are part of that, but the conversations around urban forestry are also part of that. Our conversations around indigenous rights are also part of that. But that's my sense, that we've gone through economic sustainability conversations, environmental sustainability conversations. This is all about social sustainability and socially responsible forestry. And that's the space that we're in. And we can really do awesome things in this space. Because what I would remind you all is this is the space forestry's lived in for a long time. Forestry has always said the greatest good for the greatest number, for the greatest time. We've always been about people and making sure that people are connected to the forest resource. So I really view these conversations around social justice and inclusion as an opportunity for us to step up and say, yes, the forest sector is all about people. People that work in the sector, people that recreate in the forest, people that care about the forest, people that live in regions that breathe the air from our forests. But I see this as an incredible opportunity. And the thing I'd say on that too is, 120 years ago, the forest sector was leading on the sustainability conversations with sustained yield management. I mean, the forest sector really pioneered thinking about sustainability. And I think we can do that again. I think we can reclaim that space, that we are innovative thinkers about sustainability and how we care for the resource, how we use the material, how we have diversified forest products within our economy and within our lives. So I think this is a real opportunity for us and something we should be able to hit out of the park. So with that, I would ask for any other questions, please, Eli.
Hey, we're flying, Katie. This is just great. So again, lots of good links shared and things like that. I'll remind folks one more time, if you are interested in CEU credits, look for those links. Katie, question, any evidence of mills in Minnesota switching to producing new products such as mass timber, or maybe considering those changes?
Yeah, I bet there's other people on the call that might have more insight than I do. I'm aware of some things in terms of conversations and interest. Maybe I'll just leave it there, because I think that's there is interest, but I'll leave it there, because there's
that liberty.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to start rumors. Don't blame me for rumors.
Well, there been a couple of responses to this, but I wonder if you would add to it, Katie. Are there examples of alliances between environmental groups and forest products industry that could strengthen the case for wood products as an environmental solution?
Yeah, I think we have seen many of those alliances formed, and certainly we've seen that kind of going back to the early days of forest certification, and there have been conservation and environmental groups that have partnered up with certification programs. We've seen that with Sustainable Biomass Partnership. And bottom line is all of the things I talked about. I mean, mass timber is a huge support from environmental and conservation groups. Biomass energy, if you look at the webinars that just happened in Maryland, again, conservation and environmental groups presenting there about their viewpoint of good biomass and what its place is in Maryland, and very supportive, very constructive conversations. And we're seeing that certainly around the plastics conversation. Lots of environmental groups that are saying, yes, we want to see biodegradable and renewable materials and a reduction in our use of coal and fossil fuels and plastics. So those partnerships are there, and they have been very important for moving the conversation forward.
Katie, some other nice comments, thanks and things like that in the chat, so you can review those later, but I'm not seeing other questions right now. If I've missed one from you, to those of you out there, maybe post it again, but Katie, we're at our time, and so a couple of quick announcements while anybody does any last second typing if you got questions.
Someone does have a hand raised.
Oh, thank you. Ann Oldakowski, let's give this a shot. You wanna ask a question verbally? You're muted right now.
Yeah, I'm just, you had mentioned the mill, Eli, and mills, and, you know, in central Minnesota, I see a lot of product moving north still, and it's exciting to see that. But have you guys, maybe it's a general question to everybody, are you guys seeing a slowdown up north, or is product still moving?
And I don't have an answer to that. I would certainly, if there's other attendees that want to put something in the chat, I can't speculate in terms of what the overall trend and the volumes are at this point.
Linda Kingery, Linda, thanks for sharing those links to legislation in both the House and Senate. Growing climate solutions, that's terrific. And otherwise, lots of good discussions. I think I'm going to bring us to a close now. We will share Caitlin Wilson, who's been working hard behind the scenes as she's signed in as Sustainable Forest Education Co-op, posting a bunch of links and follow-ups and resources to Katie's presentation. Caitlin and I will be gathering some of these, and we will post those links to the web page following this. The recording will be made available as soon as we get to it. Should be within a couple of days. We'd encourage you to watch it and share it. And I can't resist, and this is sort of funny. We didn't plan it this way, but the Camp 8 podcast, I mentioned it earlier. If you're interested, you can, I'm just putting the link in the chat pod now. The part we didn't plan is that our next guest might be familiar to those of you listening today. There will be a new episode of Camp 8 with Katie talking a little more generally about her career path and about forestry in Minnesota. And it's just a really great conversation too. So listen to that on Tuesday morning, and there are other ones there too. I'm not seeing any other questions, although again, I want to thank folks for sharing links and posts and good information, good questions throughout Katie's presentation today. And Katie, of course, thank you. This has just been a really informative presentation. As usual, you covered a lot of ground.